Good morning, dear colleague, distinguished guest. Welcome to the second plenary session of the WHDC. I think I'm going to move this, okay? I'm Christine Fage, I'm the French representative to the OSCE, and I will be the moderator for this morning's session. This session will deal with fundamental freedom, with main topics: freedom of religion and belief, freedom of assembly and association, human rights defenders, freedom of movement. Before we start, I will introduce the speakers. We have 3 speakers today. I will introduce the speakers that will speak 10 minutes each on those topics. The first speaker on my list is Mr. Orlov. Mr. Orlov is a Russian human rights activist. He graduated from the Faculty of Biology of Moscow State University. In 1979, he single-handedly produced and distributed leaflets against the occupation of Afghanistan by Soviet troops. In 1981, in support of the activities of the independent trade union Solidarity in Poland. He participated in the creation of the Memorial Society. In 1993, he worked in the Human Rights Committee of the Supreme Council of Russia. He was a member of the governing bodies of Memorial International and the Memorial Human Rights Center, liquidated in 2022 by the Russian authorities. Mr. Orlov also managed the work of Memorial in North Caucasus. In 2014-2016, he repeatedly traveled to the armed conflict zone in eastern Ukraine to collect information on the human rights situation and adherence to the international humanitarian law. He is co-chairman of the Memorial Human Rights Center, established in 2022. Author and co-author of several reports and books. He lives in Moscow. Mr. Orlov, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak in front of such distinguished guests. I will be speaking Russian, so those of you who don't feel as comfortable with Russian, please use interpretation. Defending the freedom of association is one of the biggest tasks within the human dimension. Without this, civil society is impossible. However, recently, in the OSCE region, we have been dealing not only with clamping down on the freedom of association as well as new threats to civil rights advocates, but we're dealing with some systemic issues that are putting under threat the very existence of the civil society as such. Therefore, some countries, some member states of OSCE introduced some restrictive measures. We civil rights defendants for many years have been talking about such threats, but unfortunately they haven't been listening to us all that much. We have been repeating what Andrei Sakharov said 50 years ago. Peace, progress, and human rights are 3 objectives that are inextricably linked. You cannot get to one while ignoring the 2 remaining ones. So this comprehensive approach to international security has been one of the foundations of the OSCE. Democracy and human rights are the very basis of the 3rd dimension within the OSCE, and this creates the greatest guarantees for trust between states. Organizing a civil society and NPOs are very important in defending these values. So clamping down on civil societies in one country is threatening security of other countries. It's a threat for the whole world and for peace in the OSCE region. So this hypothesis has been already proven right. The example is Russia and Belarus that have been both trying to destroy civil society. Russian authorities have been for many years introducing repressions internally, and they have right now started a full-scale bloody aggression against another sovereign state, Ukraine. Unlawful regime of Lukashenko in Belarus has become a participant in this aggression. They haven't been listening to us, but not only that, international institutions that are supposed to be defending human rights have not been doing their job. Let me give you an example. The reaction of the European Court for Human Rights on the complaints of human rights defenders against a law about foreign agents. We were complaining about this with the court 9 years ago, and the decision of the Human Rights Court was actually made only this year in June. And actually, this law is very detrimental. Most of the organizations who participated in this complaint were liquidated. And actually, the court made its decision already after Russia announced its leaving the Council of Europe, and Putin signed a law about non-adherence to the decisions of the court. And my country's situation has not improved. Maybe if the court made its decision some years ago, then probably work on the foreign agents law would have been slowed down at least. This year, a lot of NGOs and a lot of members of the civil society would not have been so much destroyed. And then maybe our protest against the war would have been better. So that was one example where an international organization did not fulfill its obligation to defend human rights. And in many countries, the authorities have been clamping down on the civil society quite strongly. Let me give you some methods that have been used across many countries to, for example, unlawful violence and killings, attacks against activists and human rights defenders. Quite often, these things are being done by agents of states or some non-state groups. For example, in Russia, in North Caucasus, similar violence has been going on a regular basis, and even my friends have become victims. However, these attacks are often performed not only by authorities, but persons who are the defenders of so-called traditional values. So they are attacking associations that defend women, LGBT, the LGBT society, and minority. And this is happening in Russia, Georgia, Poland, Hungary, North Macedonia, Austria, and Spain. In all these cases, it's very important to respond immediately. And law enforcement needs to respond immediately because impunity only encourages more attacks. Secondly, criminal charges, trumped-up charges against activists. Let me give you an example. There was a case against a member of Memorial, who is a great researcher of the Stalin times, Yuri Dmitriev. He was sentenced to 13 years on trumped-up charges related to pornography and sexual violence. There is, of course, also some abuse of anti-terrorist and anti-extremist legislation. So in these laws, they are introducing some clauses that are against civil society. So even if there is some legitimate criticism against authorities, these people are seen as terrorists. So therefore, people are being charged with being parts of terrorist organizations. Also, NGOs are being persecuted for alleged violation of law on freedom of association and freedom of assembly. This, of course, is against OSCE standards and the International Pact on Human Rights. So again, let me give you an example of Russia, Belarus, and Azerbaijan, because these are the countries where this is happening. Also, there are attempts to isolate NGOs from their international partners. For example, by calling certain international NGOs as undesirable organizations. For example, there are many other methods to introduce repressions. Like, for example, some organizations and NGOs are being charged of being foreign agents. This is happening in Russia. This year, any NGO can be called in Russia a foreign agent. Any activist, any advocate of human rights, because it's just enough for them, according to the law, just dealing with politics and having some international contacts, and you can be called a foreign agent. So this is happening because the law allows every possible method. So it's enough to have an international person coming to you and having a cup of coffee with them, and then you can be called a foreign agent. So foreign agents are definitely very much restricted. So any violations they commit, they can get huge fines, including also the closure of their organizations. So if this law on foreign agents is violated, many organizations have already been closed. For example, the Human Rights Center Memorial. So these are not just regular repressions by Russian authorities. This is a systemic approach, a systemic method to undermine the values that are the foundations of OSCE and the Council of Europe. There is no place in this map of the world for NGOs and human rights advocates. So the space for civil rights, civil society, and accountability is simply disappearing. When we're talking about the Helsinki Act and the Helsinki agreements, these ideas should be defended, both in the OSCE region and outside of it. And this is a big challenge that OSCE should respond to. How to do this? I will give you just 3 out of many recommendations that I might have and that have already been voiced by NGOs. First of all, the chair of OSCE should every year include freedom of assembly and defending of civil rights advocates into the list of its priorities. Secondly, there should be a special permanent representative on civil society in the OSCE region. And 3, ODIHR should create a special expert group or a think tank on freedom of association and safety of human rights defendants. There is a similar group on the rights of assembly. So let me just say, we are here, but Alej Spiracki, my friend, and many of his friends in the civil society are right now in prison with very heavy charges. This month, the coordinator of Marfa Rabkova from the Vesna Center was charged heard trumped-up charges and was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment for her activism. So there needs to be more pressure on Lukashenko's regime. There needs to be more pressure on the regime in my country to defend freedom of assembly and freedom of associations. And this should be one of the priorities within the OSCE region. Thank you so much.
Olaf, for reminding us that threatening civil society in one country is a threat for the whole world and the need to respond quickly. I will now give the floor to our second speaker, Mr. Clément Nyaleso-Sivule, who is a special rapporteur on rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association of the UN. He has been in this position since April 2018 and has worked tirelessly to promote and threaten the protection of this right in the face of emerging challenges. Recently, he presented to the Human Rights Council a report on protecting human rights in the context of peaceful protest in crisis situation. Mr. Vule has worked as a human rights advocate and defender in his native country and across Africa. Mr. Vule, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Distinguished OSCE Chairman-in-Office, distinguished state delegates, and civil society representative. It is my pleasure to address you as a United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association. I'm pleased to be able to share with you my perspective concerning this fundamental freedom globally and in the OSCE region. I would like to first thank the Polish OSCE Chairmanship-in-Office and the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights for the invitation extended to me. Let me start by stressing the important role civil society and also protest movements play in the advancement and the protection of human rights and democracy. The right to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association are fundamental rights. They guarantee the plurality of voices and also provide platform for people to advance for change and share their grievances and dissents. This is key for a free democratic society. As I stressed in my report to the Human Rights Council in June, dedicated to protection of peaceful protests in crisis situations, dedicated to the peaceful assembly in the protection of peaceful assembly in crisis situation, the right to freedom of assembly and association are important, and the protest is important in protecting voices and also ensuring that marginalized groups and groups that are facing human rights violation can also express their grievances and also express their view in how this crisis can be solved. This is important for maintaining and achieving peace and security. In my report to the UN General Assembly in 2019 and 2021, I affirmed that the protection of these rights is crucial for the implementation of development and poverty eradication efforts, as well as in addressing the climate crisis and ensuring a just transition towards environmental sustainable economy and societies. In particular, these rights provide people living in poverty with opportunity to be agents of the development of their community, as well as to build a greener and more sustainable future. However, I'm very concerned by the global trends which I have observed in this recent year, a trend of suppression of these fundamental freedoms, including in the advancement of advanced democracies, such as in the OSCE region. With this discussion, I would like to draw your attention to some key concerns. First, I'm very concerned that authorities have used stigmatization, including sometimes hate speech, as a tool to silence civil society and peaceful assemblies. Governments, including in the OSCE region, have often stigmatized peaceful protests as terrorists, rioters, hooligans, or alleged to justify restriction and violation in the context of assemblies. Secondly, states are using existing or specifically designed legislation to curtail the rights to peaceful assembly and of association. These include laws that increase barriers to organizing and participating in peaceful assembly. Blanket ban and mandatory authorization of assemblies are often imposed on assembly. Also, some states adopted legal measures that gives law enforcement authority broad power to restrict peaceful assembly. Law and courts have been weaponized to suppress assembly through criminalization activists, assembly participants, and organizers. For example, various UN experts have raised serious concern with the fake war news law adopted by Russia in relation to the war in Ukraine, which provide for up to 15 years imprisonment. 100 anti-war protests have been arrested and detained across Russia. Particularly worrying is the emerging trends in the adoption and the use of foreign agent law to stigmatize and criminalize civil society for receiving foreign funding. This creates a hostile environment and a chilling effect on civil society. The recent amendment of Russia Foreign Agent NGO law that extends its scope and expand prison term for those convicted of confidentially cooperating with a foreign state, an international or foreign organization, has a severe effect on civil society inside and outside. I have observed a worrying trend of similar legislation aimed at restricting foreign funding for civil society emerging in other countries in the region and globally. In my recent report to the UN Human Rights Council, I reiterate that the rights for association access to funding is essential not only to the existence of the association itself, but also to the realization of other human rights. When these rights is unduly restricted, it impacts not only association, but also the communities and victims they serve. The OSCE should pay a particular attention to address such foreign funding-related restriction legislation and ensure it is not expanding in the region. I'm further concerned at what it seems to be a widespread tendency of states to view peaceful protesters and critical civil society as a national security or public order threats. As a response, states resort to violence, repression, arbitrary arrest, and the heavy hand of the criminal law. In a number of situations, we have seen states declaring a state of emergency in response to assemblies. The misuse of emergency measures by states and the resulting imposing of disproportionate restriction on the right to freedom of assembly is particularly worrying. This trend especially exacerbates with the COVID-19 pandemic, when an unprecedented number of states around the world have adopted sweeping emergency law imposing blanket bans or severe restrictions on the right to peaceful assembly. Many states around the world appear to have utilized the measure to expand securitization and executive power and to attack oppositional figures and social movements. National security and public order law, including anti-terrorism and security measures, continue to be misused by government to ban or criminalize peaceful protests, including sanctioning the use of unlawful force. My mandate has also observed an increased militarization in the policing of peaceful protests, which result in unlawful and excessive use of force. It is too often that security forces have used unlawful force, including lethal force, against peaceful protests. In some instances, shoot to kill orders have been issued by authority in a number of protest contexts. The indiscriminate and disproportionate use of lethal weapons, such as tear gas and water cannon, which resulted in serious harm of assembly participants and bystanders, is also very concerning. The lack of accountability for such abuses has been alarming, and it requires urgent attention. Moreover, lawyers defending activists whose rights have been violated have themselves been arbitrarily detained. Hence, I have launched the guideline for lawyers aimed at supporting their work of providing access to justice in the context of assemblies. States have increasingly failed to facilitate peaceful assembly and protect those taking part in assembly, journalists, and monitors. Particular attention should be also paid to the additional barrier and restriction faced by certain groups, mainly marginalized groups, when exercising their right to freedom of assembly and of association. Refugees in the region have been often denied the rights to assembly, and civil society working to assist them, such as in Greece, have faced criminal sanction and hostile environment for their humanitarian work. I have raised my concern regarding the ban in Serbia of LGBTI march for security reasons. States should take all necessary measures to provide adequate protection for the participants and to enable them to enjoy their rights without fear of harassment, intimidation, or violence. Finally, I would like to highlight the restriction to the exercise of freedom of peaceful assembly and association online. We observe an increase in the number of prohibitions to access online content and platforms, including social media, and the use of overly broad provision often established in cybercrime law to restrict online content. We have seen how very sophisticated digital surveillance tools can be used against civil society actors and journalists without any accountability, such as the Pegasus spyware. Facial recognition have also been used for arbitrary surveillance of protesters. The tendency of the states in the region to allow law enforcement to use such technology in public space to survey protests should be discouraged because it violates the the right to privacy of participants of assembly and has a chilling effect. There are very concerning trends. Suppression, repression, and silencing of civil society and assembly will only exacerbate insecurity in the region and undermine our democracies and human rights. In a critical time when society faces multiple crises affecting the security and well-being of people, people's voices must be heard and their needs addressed, not suppressed and silenced. Governments must enable, create safe space and facilitate peaceful protests and strengthen democratic institutions. Civil society should not be seen as the enemy, but as partner, including when seeking solutions to overcome or recover from crisis. Recently, we have witnessed the importance of civil society in Europe in providing vital emergency support to refugees from Ukraine. They are important partners also for ensuring sustainable recovery from COVID pandemic and for tackling the climate crisis. And I count on your support to enable civil society, to enable and ensure that civil society is given space during the upcoming COP 2027. In my report to the Human Rights Council 55 session, dedicated to the protests in crisis situations, I have called on states to strengthen protection of these rights, irrespective of the crisis or emergency, including in armed conflict situations. I urge states to refrain from misusing states of emergency to clamp down on peaceful protests and to take proactive measures to strengthen community policing, train police facilitating protests in de-escalation and negotiation skills, develop protocol ensuring proper use of force, aiming in facilitating rather than repressing peaceful protests. Further, I would like to thank ODIHR for their cooperation with my mandate. The joint declaration that we issued on 15 September with the OSCE ODIHR and other regional mechanisms provide a roadmap to states of protecting right to assembly in emergency situations. Further, to enhance the protection of the right to freedom of assembly, I have been mandated by the Human Rights Council to develop tools for law enforcement. I will be holding a consultation with states and law enforcement next year, for which I would like to count on full cooperation of ODIHR. Thank you. In conclusion, Madam, I would like to thank OSCE member states for their support to my mandate, such as supporting the renewal of the mandate that I hold today. When civil society is repressed, peaceful protest is suppressed, independent voices silenced, and democratic institutions under control, it gives rise to an authoritarian regime. And we have to be concerned about what is going on in the region today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Volley, for reminding us that the protection of right of peaceful assembly is key to foster democracy and advance all sectors of society, and sharing your concern about what's happening in the OSCE region. And now I would like to give the floor to Madame Sarkassian. Madame Sarkassian is a program director for Eurasia Partnership Foundation and a member of ODIHR panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief. Our work areas include the promotion of freedom of religion or belief in Armenia, protection of minorities from all forms of discrimination, and participation in justice sector reforms. Isabella also has about 20 years of experience in conflict transformation areas in the South Caucasus and beyond. In 2017, Isabella received the Freedom Defender Award for her work in the field of minority rights protection in Armenia. In 2022, Isabella was reappointed as a member of OSCE ODIHR panel of experts for freedom of religion and belief, and for a second term. She served as a member of the panel also during 2016 and 2018. I will give the floor now to Madame Sarkassian.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor and privilege to be here at the same panel with such distinguished speakers. I should confess that it's very hard for me to speak at the very moment when my home country, Armenia, is facing an existential threat. And when I say existential, it's not an exaggeration. However, I believe that systemic and arbitrary violations of fundamental rights and freedoms we are talking about today, often neglected by the international community, led to tragic armed conflicts we are currently living through. Freedom of religion or belief, or FORB, is one of the fundamental pillars of the human rights architecture, embedded in Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, European Convention of Human Rights, Convention of Human Rights adopted by 1995 by the Commonwealth of Independent States, it's Article 10. They also lay at the core of the OSCE human dimension approach and are acknowledged by the Helsinki Final Act as one of its 10 guiding principles. It is important to stress that FORB, as all human rights, is interrelated, interdependent, and intertwined in a human rights framework. FORB is particularly linked to such rights as freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and freedom of speech. There are a number of important and politically binding commitments on FORB in conjunction with other rights articulated in OSCE Ministerial Council decisions and other documents. Hence, it is possible to state that on normative level, FORB is well established and acknowledged by the participating states. However, it's quite unfortunately, on the ground and on the level of implementation, we are witnessing a deterioration of FORB in OSCE region, especially amid armed conflicts, security challenges, a weakening of international organization and of the international order. Quite obviously, large-scale armed conflicts do provoke multidimensional challenges, not only for the countries directly affected by the conflict, but to the whole region. UN special rapporteurs, human rights activists, and other organizations have been raising the alarm for many years now on issues such as arbitrary bureaucratic restrictions, denial of legal personality status, indoctrination of children in public schools, not only for children from minority groups, but also non-believers, discriminatory laws and practices, unnecessary expert examinations of religious literature, restrictions prohibiting members of religious communities from serving in certain state positions, such as police, hate crimes against various religious groups, and multiple discrimination against women and girls. Today, we witness gross and outrageous war crimes, violations of human rights, and irreversible damage done to the communities, religious sites, cemeteries, culture, and spiritual heritage as a result of the armed conflicts. During a side event today called Attack on Religious Freedom during the armed aggressions of Russia against Ukraine, organized by the Center of Civic Liberties, leaders of religious communities and civil society from Ukraine will share hands-on experience from the field. I see Maxim Vasin, my colleague here, who is going to lead the session, I believe. During attacks on religious sites very often are deliberate and targeted. We witness examples of medieval vandalism and intended humiliation, even though internationally attacking religious sites during conflict is a subject of international criminal law and international humanitarian law. In South Caucasus region, for many years now, there are mutual accusations in destruction, renaming, and disputing the origins of the cultural and religious heritage. However, the case of Razan Church in Shushi, which was hit by Azerbaijani missiles twice in October 2020 during the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, stands alone. I quote, "The two strikes on the church, the second one while journalists and other civilians had gathered at the site, appeared to be deliberate," said Hugh Williamson, Europe and Central Asia Director at Human Rights Watch. "These attacks should be impartially investigated and those responsible held to account." End of the quote. In this regard, it's important to mention that FORB is non-derogable right. Under Article 4 of the ICCPR, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion must be guaranteed at all times and cannot be derogated from in any circumstances. In wars or other public emergencies, the right to manifest one's religion and beliefs could be limited exceptionally rare cases, as defined in Article 18 of ICCPR. Hence, participating states should take all possible measures to guarantee that FORB of all people is respected without discrimination, also under the current complex circumstances. It's also important that crimes are investigated and perpetrators are brought to justice. It is a positive sign that there are more and more high-level debates on the issue of FORB and armed conflicts. For instance, in 2019, an open area formula meeting on advancing the safety and security of persons belonging to religious minorities in armed conflict took place in UN. It was organized by the Permanent Mission of Republic of Poland to UN in partnership with permanent missions of Brazil, Canada, the Kingdom of Jordan, United Kingdom and United States. In 2020, former UN Special Rapporteur on FORB, Dr. Ahmad Shahid, who is currently a member of OSCE ODIHR panel of experts on FORB, released a highly valuable and thought-provoking report on rights of persons belonging to religious or belief minorities in situations of conflict and security. In his report, Dr. Shahid maps diverse experience of religious or belief minorities during situations of conflict or insecurity. To me, among the most striking findings of the report is continuous use of sexual violence as an instrument of humiliation against women and also men from minority communities. He also brings evidence that where governments or de facto authorities actively target communities with violence and persecution, they also often seek to prevent them from accessing humanitarian aid. I hope that this discussion here today, we may also provoke a constructive debate on what could be done in order to eradicate such unacceptable practices. The topic of formed and armed conflicts is inevitably and very closely related to the issue of security. The OSCE has adopted a unique three-dimensional approach in which for the first time human rights principles were included as an integral element of a regional security framework on the same basis as political, military and economic issues. ODIHR explicitly states that, I quote, "There is no hierarchy among these principles and no government can claim that they have established political or economic security before addressing human rights in democracy," end of the quote. There are several OSCE follow-up documents reaffirming these principles, and ODIHR takes significant efforts to provide guidance to participating states on freedom of religion or belief and security. For instance, in 2019, a policy guidance on freedom of religion or belief and security was released, providing guiding principles, practical guidance, and recommendations to address a number of issues of intersection of freedom of religion or belief and security in OSCE region. However, large-scale armed conflicts, the backsliding of democratic institutions, and overall societal frustration in many countries have strengthened securitization tendency affecting human rights. I quote the report of Dr. Shahid here. Several state authorities have invoked situations of conflict or insecurity as either politically convenient justifications to their failure to fulfill their human rights obligations or to instrumentalize fragility of certain communities to further their political goals. In many cases, states use oppressive counterterrorism measures to infringe on the rights of religious or belief minorities in the name of combating extremism and insecurity. Such tendencies are visible not only in countries directly affected by the conflicts, but also beyond. As a matter of common practice, people belonging to minority religions are often wrongly accused of espionage, serving the interest of various, mostly foreign actors. There are serious allegations that in certain member states, religious organizations, but also NGOs, the media, and people defending human rights or religion or belief and human rights have been subjected to illegal surveillance. Unfortunately, in many OSCE member states, and now I would like to quote my colleague John Kinahan of Forum 18 and another member of the ODIHR panel of experts, quite often FORB and security are linked in a way that undermines both. Civil society and community groups are crucial actors in documenting, advocating, providing support to the affected people on the ground, also in settings where the international community has very limited access, if any. Nevertheless, CSS working in the field of FORB often find themselves either under pressure or neglected, underfunded, and unfairly labeled both by far right of protected rights of extremists and from far left for amplifying voices of the conservatives. I believe that more interaction between government, intergovernmental organizations, and civil society is needed to overcome biases and strengthen partnerships. Dear colleagues, I come from war-torn region myself, and an ongoing attack, this time on Armenia proper, is the fourth large-scale armed conflict I'm experienced in my early 40s. And I know better than many that the challenges we are facing now are enormous, and many things are easier to declare than to implement. Nevertheless, implementation of human dimension commitments on FORB and the interlinked rights everywhere in OSCE area is vital as it strengthens regional security. I've seen with my own eyes how difficult it is to investigate war crimes under the falling bombs. I'm aware of controversies around the place and role of the religion in modern societies, politicization and securitization of the discourse, and so far. Hence, I find it extremely important to underline that FORB protects people, not religions, beliefs, ideas, or opinions per se. It's all about people who should be able to have their rights, religious views, ideas, opinions, or belief manifest and enjoy them fully without discrimination and without fear. Not only believers, but also non-believers. And I feel frustrated that behind massive violence, flagrant atrocities, and gross violations, we all might fail to see the tragedy of one individual, of a person. Having said all that, I sincerely believe in power of democratic resilience, windows that dialogue and empathy can open. I also strongly believe in human agency. Hence, I would like to finish my speech with inspiring examples, such as religious track of the Cyprus peace process, which started as a quiet initiative in 2009 and evolved into the active peace-building effort. But even more, I'm empowered by active dialogue going on in Ukraine between the churches of different denominations. I'm proud of my colleagues, many of whom are in this room or will arrive later to Warsaw, who work in restrictive environments under enormous pressure and keep serving the people and values of democracy and human rights. Again, I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my thoughts on an issue that for me is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madame Sarkassian, for raising the topic of the link between protecting FORB and protecting people and their security. We are at the end of the presentation of the panelists. Before opening the floor for intervention or comments, I will kindly remind the following rules of the meeting. When given the floor, please introduce yourself, give your name and the organization you represent. You may only take the floor on behalf of the organization under which you have registered to attend this conference. Note that the speaking time is 3 minutes, and here I would kindly ask you to mind the clock in order to enable everybody that wants to speak to be able to take the floor. Comment directly on the topic of the session and feel free to ask questions relating to the discussion. Please keep your contribution brief and to the point, and to facilitate the work of interpreters, speak clearly and slowly. The proceedings should be held in a respectful manner and in line with the code of conduct of the conference that you will find online. Statements which may be disturbing to the order and safety are not permitted. All conference participants may also submit written comments and documents electronically via the meeting audio platform. Submitted document will be made available at the said platform to all registered participants. Delegation of OSCE participant state may also exercise their right of reply regarding any statement made by another participant during the session. To do so, right of replies, a maximum of 1 for each participating state for a given session, should be submitted electronically via meeting ODIHR platform. Submitted right of reply will be made available at the said platform to all registered participants. Any registered participant wishing to raise a procedural issue will be able to do so directly with representatives of the CIO in the room. Procedural issues are not to be raised from the floor. For further consultation, meeting rules and code of conduct are published on the conference website. I will now open the speakers list that is for this session that is available for consultation in the room here and on the website. And the first speaker on my list is Coordination des associations et des particuliers pour la liberté de conscience.
Thank you.
Madame, you have the floor.
Thank you. France, recognized for its values towards secularism and respect for freedom of religion or belief, has serious deficiencies in its territory in its commitment to respect freedom of religion or belief. Our recommendations to France are to consider more seriously its commitment regarding international convention, to consider the recommendations of the July 2020 US Commission International Religious Freedom Report, as well as to implement the Republican contract voted in 2021 to FECRIS, an NGO funded by the French government at more than 90% for over 20 years. Indeed, for years, we have been alerting France about the dangerous links that FECRIS has with one of its members, Mr. Alexander Dworkin. Dworkin is a Russian activist with strong links to the Russian Orthodox Church and close to Patriarch Kirill, who for decades have been inundating the Russian, Chinese, and Western media with hate speech against spiritual minorities and anti-Ukrainian propaganda. He was the vice president of FECRIS for years, and today he remains at its board. At the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, we have once again alerted by letter the French government of the anti-Ukrainian activities of Dworkin. This has remained a dead letter. Even if FECRIS has posted on its website few lines of support to the Ukrainian people, it is not less true that Dworkin is still a member of FECRIS and that he is currently spreading his hate speech against Ukraine and blame it for its acquaintance with the West. The fact that France continues to finance such an association, in addition to the lack of respect for freedom of religion or belief, places it in a contradictory political position because on one side France supports Ukraine and at the same time gives its assent by silence and inaction to the pro-Russian discourse. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Second speaker on my list is France. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, distinguished participants, France will be associated to the EU statement which will be delivered later. Now, I first wish to thank the OSCE Chairmanship-in-Office, the Polish Presidency, and the ODIHR for convening this conference on fundamental freedoms. Fundamental freedoms are deeply interlinked, mutually reinforcing, and thus equally important to France. This is the reason why France is deeply committed to protect and promote fundamental freedoms, notably freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief at home and abroad, on which I want to insist on today. Freedom of religion or belief is enshrined in our Constitution, which says that the French Republic shall ensure the equality of all citizens before the law, without distinction of origin, race, or religion, and shall respect all beliefs. It's also at the core of our international commitments. This includes the right to believe or not to believe, to have or not to have a religion, to change religion, to manifest one's religion or belief individually or in community with others, in public or in private, through worship, observance, practice, and teaching. For the sake of equality of citizens, the French state is secular, which means that the state and the civil servants have to remain strictly neutral and shall not take side for or against any specific religion or belief. Everyone is free to believe or not to believe and will be treated equally. As such, France's understanding of the freedom of religion or belief is not special or original, nor exceptional. It's strictly abiding by the Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We have the exact same commitment at home that we have abroad. We think that everyone, everywhere, should have the right to believe in what he wants or not to believe, to change his religion or his belief without being discriminated. We are convinced that freedom of religion or belief and other fundamental rights are mutually reinforcing, and therefore we promote them through a comprehensive, holistic, and universal approach. France refuses the instrumentalization of religion by preachers of hate and violence.
I'm sorry, can you wrap it up, please?
Okay. We also support interreligious dialogue as a tool for peace. My speaking time being limited, I'll stop now. The integrality of my intervention will be transmitted to the ODIHR platform as indicated. Thank you, Madame Moderator.
Thank you very much, merci. And now the third speaker on my list is Georgia.
Madam Chairperson, distinguished audience, I am the representative of the State Security Service of my country. And first I would like to stress the importance of the opportunity to discuss the issues of freedom of movement in my country, which is a result of unlawful occupation of territories of Georgia by the Russian Federation. I would like to remind you that since the occupation of two regions of Georgia, Abkhazia and Tkhinvali, commonly called South Ossetia, was a result of 2008 war, after which Russian Federation restricted the freedom of movement of the local population by setting up so-called crossing points on both directions, followed by so-called illegal borderization process across this occupation line and numerous illegal detentions of locals for so-called violations of it. This undermines the enjoyment of freedom of association, freedom of participation, and peaceful assembly to the locals. The so-called crossing points can only be used by a certain segment of population, mostly available for those who reside near the occupation line. Sometimes access are granted only to certain categories of people, like those in need of urgent medical care, or women or elderly. Or at the same time is denied to those individuals who deem unfavorable. Furthermore, so-called crossing points are occasionally closed for various reasons, including when elections take place in Georgia, or there is some kind of political rally or other kind of public gathering. Sometimes the crossing points are closed for prolonged periods, which significantly worsens the daily life of people living in those occupied regions, especially in the occupied Gali and Akhalgori districts, which are populated by Georgians, as they often lack the access to vital services and medicines and are restricted of visiting their relatives and family members. Today, the situation is particularly alarming in the direction of occupied Tkhinvali region, where the so-called crossing points were permanently closed for almost 3 years, from September 2019 until August of the current year, 2022. Currently, there are 3 so-called crossing points opened out of 4, only for 10 days per monthly period. Although only people living adjacent to this occupation line are allowed to cross. It is noteworthy that closure of the crossing points in Tkhinvali region was an ultimatum of development in village Chorchana, where central government set up a standard police checkpoint in order to prevent
sorry to interrupt. Can you wrap it up, please?
Yes. The closure of crossing points coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic, which made locals' life even worse. And the closure
Sir,
of 2000...
Please wrap it up now.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I would say that the Russian Federation is responsible for human rights violations on these territories as they enjoy the effective control as judged by ODIHR in 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the fourth speaker on my list is Right and Freedom of Turkmenistan Citizens.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Turkmenistan is one of few countries which doesn't have independent organizations. Apart from that, the government exerts pressure on the independent organizations, and therefore they have to work abroad. People live abroad in Sweden, in Great Britain. Muhammad Jumayev, Muhammad Zhidikov, Kamat Karidov. They use the terrorist activities, and they are presented trumped-up charges, and they threat them with trials. They say that undesirable persons will be brought back to Turkmenistan very fast. And one person was kidnapped in Russia and brought back to Turkmenistan. They are threatened that their family members will also be subjected to oppression in the country, also including physical oppression. So the government of Turkmenistan also eliminated or confiscated the property of some of the activists. Thank you.
And I thank you. Fifth on my list is Association for International Good Neighborhood Forum. Sir, you have the floor.
Dear speaker and participants, my name is Mindaugas Ramoška, and I am co-founder and coordinator of Association International Good Neighborhood Forum based in Lithuania. It was registered according to all laws and regulations 3 months ago. Our main goal is to establish good and friendly relationship with neighboring countries in cultural, social and economical areas. Activities of association are based on deep belief in civic society, cooperation, and European values. This is what freedom of association is supposed to be. People from all over the world gathered at this conference proved that no activity would be possible without freedom of movement. However, our government bodies want to close down our association for these activities and already filed a lawsuit based on violation of public order, visiting neighboring countries, and anti-state activity. Dainius Žalimas, member of Venice Commission, head of the Law and Democracy Center, said that actions of prosecutors should be taken in order to close the association. His quote, "Apparently, there is a lack of imagination to interpret what is anti-state activity," end of quote. We strongly believe that any charges must be made according to the laws and not by imagination. Yesterday, same person, side event speaker Dainius Žalimas, who proposed to shut down the association using imagination, asked laureate of UNESCO Peace City Project Award, co-founder, press representative, and delegate of this conference, Kazimieras Juraitis. Kazimieras, please stand up. To leave this side event by saying, quote, "I am even surprised that such people are walking in freedom." Dainius Žalimas' words are already published in Lithuanian press, where he admits that, quote, "I had to ask him out. I said that his place is not here, but in prison. I wonder that our prosecutor's office is doing, that such people participate in such events," end of quote. We are concerned that freedoms of associations, belief, and movement could be violated even at this conference. We ask that yesterday's incident of unethical behavior of Dainius Žalimas will be investigated, and hopefully it never happens again. Also, we expect that your observers will visit our association's trial in Lithuania to ensure that fundamental freedoms will not be violated. Thank you for your time and understanding.
And I thank you. Sixth speaker on my list is Human Rights House Foundation.
Merci,
You have the
Madame.
floor.
And a special note of thanks to this morning's panelists. I'm Dave Elsrod with the Human Rights House Foundation and based in Geneva. Across the OSCE region, we are witnessing a troubling trend as attacks on human rights defenders are on the rise. Most notably in Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Hungary, and Russia, we are seeing a rise in arbitrary detention, smear campaigns, hate speech, physical attacks, and even in some cases murder. We are also in the midst of an enormous movement of human rights defenders across the OSCE region. As the space for human rights defenders is shrinking and attacks against HRDs are on the rise, many are forced to leave their communities or countries along with their families. HRDs have been forced to flee Azerbaijan and Belarus since extreme crackdowns by authorities reignited in early 2020. Some are here with us in this room. More recently, Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine forced HRDs based in Ukraine to flee as reports of lists of HRDs targeted by Russian authorities became public. At the same time, as a new Iron Curtain descends on Russia, many Russian human rights defenders are, once again, being forced to flee. Indeed, in the 1960s and 1970s, it was steamships full of dissidents. Today, it is plane and carloads full of human rights defenders. However, as governments across the region struggle with adopting meaningful responses to Russia's war in Ukraine, new policies are being put in place are ignoring the very real needs of Russian human rights defenders and their families. Russian HRDs and their families report increasing difficulty in obtaining visas in order to relocate outside of Russia. For Russian HRDs who have managed to leave the country, they face restrictions to their freedom of movement. In fact, we have troubling reports of Russian HRDs based inside of the Schengen area being prevented from leaving their country of residence or entering Poland in order to attend this conference. There is no excuse for preventing the free movement of human rights defenders. Human rights defenders in exile can face opaque and difficult to navigate administrative procedures in order to establish organizations in host countries. As a result, it can be nearly impossible for HRDs in exile to register organizational bank accounts and receive funding. Human rights defenders in exile often want to continue their work, and host governments should facilitate processes and procedures to allow them to do so. I'd like to ask the panelists, what can OSCE participating states do unilaterally to remain safe havens for human rights defenders fleeing threats and attacks? What specific policies would you recommend? And how can the framework of the OSCE facilitate the adoption of such policies? I thank you.
And I thank you. Now my list is Center for Studies on New Religions.
Thank you. I would like to express some concern about the increasing use in the public discourse of the word cult, or in French, sect, and its equivalent in other languages. This word was originally a respectable sociological category indicating religious groups whose members had all converted like early Christianity rather than being born in the group. But around World War II, the word cult was used in a criminological sense to indicate religious movements which had committed or would commit serious crimes. And because of this ambiguity, scholars of religion largely switched to use new religious movements for new groups and criminal religious movements for groups that commit crimes that obviously exist both within old religions and new religions. However, criminal religious movements are groups that commit common crimes such as homicide, sexual abuse, terrorism, or money laundering. And since the 1960s, an anti-cult movement accuses some new religious movements of imaginary crimes, such as being a cult or using brainwashing, a term invented during the Cold War to explain why people converted to communism and later extended to religion. And the vast majority of scholars and courts of law in the United States and elsewhere came to the conclusion that there is no brainwashing. Brainwashing does not exist, and conversion to new religious movements is similar to conversion to old religions. The anti-cult movement became an international lobby which in Europe operates mostly through an umbrella organization called FECRIS. And anti-cult ideology was also officially adopted in Russia to justify the repression of religious minorities. More recently, Russian anti-cultists have used the cult rhetoric to justify the aggression against Ukraine, claiming that cults dominate Ukrainian politics and are used by the Ukrainian intelligence to infiltrate Russia. It is unclear whether FECRIS, while it did condemn the Russian invasion, also took action to also condemn its Russian affiliates and members. However, what is clear is that Russian and Western anti-cultists share the same ideology and use the word cult as a tool of discrimination and repression. We urge the democratic governments that sponsor FECRIS to reconsider their ill-advised support. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Norway.
Thank you, Chair. I am pleased to make this statement as the Norwegian government's special envoy for freedom of religion or belief. Norway first appointed a special envoy for freedom of religion or belief back in 2012. The envoy is mandated to work with civil society organizations and within broader international organizations and alliances. The envoy is also the head of the Norwegian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Chair, promoting of freedom of religion and belief is an important part of Norwegian policy, including our foreign policy. It is a basic human right and must be respected. Human rights are for all, irrespective of gender or belief. And we are particularly aware that religious beliefs, doctrines, traditions, and practices cannot be used to justify discrimination and exclusion of girls and women, LGBTQI people, or religious minorities. Unfortunately, and in many countries, people are discriminated against based on ethnicity, religion, and culture. The root causes of violations are often complex. Norway is pleased to cooperate with the OSCE, including the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, on issues regarding tolerance and non-discrimination and freedom of religion and belief. As mentioned in the Norwegian general response to the report of the personal representatives to the Permanent Council, we would be more than happy to welcome all the 3 personal representatives of the CIO to an in-person visit to Norway to discuss some of the issues at hand more thoroughly with relevant stakeholders. I thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Church of Scientology, Public Affairs and Human Rights Office.
Thank you, Madam. My name is Ivan Arjona, and I'm representing all the Scientologist communities at the OSCE region. We want to thank the OSCE Chairmanship for organizing this conference, and we would like to congratulate Germany's court system for delivering justice as per judgment 8C 9.21 through its Federal Administrative Court to Scientologists who had often suffered systemic discrimination and at times damaging the human dignity of our members by state and public authorities who have been demanding our members to resign from their religion if they want to access certain rights and facilities that are otherwise available to all German citizens. According to a statement of that court, a municipality may not make granting of a financial subsidy with which environmental policy objectives are pursued, subject to the condition that the applicants submit a declaration distancing themselves from the Scientology organization. End of quote. Demanding a faith-related declaration and refusing rights because of it purposefully interferes with the freedom of religion and belief guaranteed by Article 4, 1 and 2 of the Basic Law. The interference is already unconstitutional for lack of legal basis. Therefore, we kindly suggest Germany, A, to stop funding or supporting any project that dehumanizes Scientologists in Germany, such as the creation of denigratory videos and literature. B, to take effective measures to ensure that public regulations, laws, and functionaries in the conduct of their public duties do not discriminate against any Scientologists on the basis of their religion or belief. C, to include Scientologists in fostering religious freedom and pluralism by promoting the ability of members of all religious communities to manifest their religion and to contribute openly and on equal footing to society. D, to encourage the representation and meaningful participation of individuals irrespective of their religion in all sectors of society. E, to counter religious profiling of Scientologists, which is understood to be the individual's use of religion as a criterion in conducting questioning searches or in requisites to access rights that are otherwise accessible to all citizens. And lastly, we openly and respectfully offer a dialogue with the German delegation so that we can work together to end any reminiscence of discrimination and to rightfully implement the circa 50 court decisions in Germany that protect the rights of citizens to freely believe and practice Scientology without any hindrance from the authorities. Thank you very much.
I thank you. Next on my list is Germany. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Madam Moderator, I'm delivering this statement on behalf of the EU member states, as well as on the following states: Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Ukraine, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Andorra, and San Marino. The European Union attaches high priority to the promotion and protection of the right of freedom of religion or belief, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, as well as to the freedom of movement. The EU recognizes the important role of human rights defenders in protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms and supports them worldwide. These rights and freedoms are being particularly curtailed by the Russian Federation. During its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia distorts the freedom of movement, including through so-called filtration camps, where Ukrainian families are separated and those who are deemed, unquote, unreliable, quote, unquote, disappear. We are also witnessing an unprecedented crackdown on Russian civil society intended to silence domestic opposition. Over 18,000 arrests of protesters, documented by observers from civil society since February 24, underscore how rigorously Russia restricts the freedom of peaceful assembly and expression. The recent report of the OSCE Moscow mechanism confirms this assessment. The EU continues to condemn the Russian policy curtailing activities of independent civil society, especially the use of laws on so-called foreign agents and extremist organizations, such as in the case of the closing and liquidation of Memorial International and the Memorial Human Rights Center. These laws run counter to Russia's international human rights laws obligations. The extremism law also severely affects the exercise of the freedom of religion or belief, for instance, in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses. Other religious communities also suffer. Clergymen of various denominations have been pressured by the Russian state or prosecuted for statements because of their stance on Russia's aggression against Ukraine. For instance, the Archbishop of the Russian Evangelical Lutheran Church left Russia, so did the chief rabbi of Moscow. They both stated that the Russian state put pressure on religious leaders to support the war in public statements. The EU strongly condemns the continued flagrant violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms both within Belarus as well as through the Lukashenko's regime's support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Extremism charges are a common tool used by the regime to curb any civil society activism. The most recent court verdicts against a number of human rights defenders, including Maria Rabkova and Andrei Shapyuk, is a further grave testimony to the increasing repression of civil society in Belarus. Close to 1,000 of CSOs and opposition parties have been liquidated or forced to close since 2020. And opposition parties, and according to civil society sources, authorities stop nowhere short of raids of private houses and offices of human rights, educational and political groups and organizations, charities and think tanks. Political prisoners now number over 1,300. We strongly condemn this escalation of violence of human rights law, including the reprisals against civil society and human rights defenders.
Excuse me, Ambassador, can you wrap it up, please?
I will wrap up. The EU will continue to oppose unjustified restrictions of freedom of religion or belief, of movement, of peaceful assembly and association, including confinement of civil society space and attempts to hinder the work of civil society. The EU remains committed to exchange, cooperate and support within the framework of the OSCE and beyond. And I thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Union of Informed Citizens.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. My name is Daniel Ioannisyan and I represent Union of Informed Citizens. Firstly, in the context of religious freedom, I would like to refer to a relevant policy of Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh. I assume that you all know that in 2020, Azerbaijan launched a full-scale war, as a result of which many territories of Nagorno-Karabakh became under Azerbaijani control. As a result, 149 churches came under the control of Baku, including 3 churches that are more than 1,500 years old. Those churches, cathedrals and monasteries began to suffer the same fate as anything and anyone Armenian that has ever happened, ever appeared under the control of Azerbaijan. That's destruction and transformation. At the state level, it was announced that these places of religious worship are not Armenian churches, and some of them began to be simply demolished, while others, under the name of rehabilitation works, were disfigured, including Kazanchetsats Cathedral in Shushi, where, by the way, my great-grandmother's brother served as a priest more than 100 years ago. The Honorable Representative of Azerbaijan announced here yesterday that they want peace in the region. But those who want peace will not destroy the places of religious worship of the other party. The destruction of places of religious worship of the neighboring nation leads to rising of mutual hatred. If you deprive your neighbor nation of a place of religious worship that has served them for more than 1,000 years, and even more, if you destroy it, then what is the value of your words about wanting peaceful coexistence? In this regard, we consider that the international community should demand that Azerbaijan immediately stop the destruction of Armenian churches and other places of religious worship under its control. Moreover, we believe that in this respect, involvement of UNESCO in the process would be very useful. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to address issues related to the freedom of assemblies in Armenia. Even before 2018 revolution in Armenia, a high level of state tolerance towards peaceful assemblies had started to form in the country. It increased in recent years when opposition was able to block the central streets and intersection in Yerevan for more than months without serious obstacles. However, we have observed cases of issue of disproportionate force against protesters by police officers and representatives of other law enforcement agencies. We have filed relevant complaints to prosecutor's office with video evidences. But the investigations in all of those cases have not recorded progress and no criminal prosecution was initiated.
Can you wrap it up, please?
Yeah. No prosecution was initiated against any police officer. In this regard, we call Armenian authorities to stop protection of police officers who violated the rights of freedom of assembly. Thank you very much.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Order of St. Andrews.
Franklin Sisson on behalf of the Order of St. Andrew. The Order of St. Andrew the Apostle once again reports that the Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarch in Turkey is denied basic religious freedom. The Order is a United States-based organization of Orthodox Christian laymen whose mission is to defend the Ecumenical Patriarchate and to preserve its important role in the spiritual life of 350 million Orthodox Christians, as well as to preserve its important prophetic and pastoral voice for all people of the world. The Ecumenical Patriarch was founded by the Apostle Andrew in 37 AD and has served as a vital religious center for Orthodox Christians ever since. Yet the Ecumenical Patriarchate for many years has faced a hostile environment, which at times has threatened its very existence. That is why in 2022, Turkey continues to be on the special watch list of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, as it has been since 2013. According to the 2022 report, the state of religious freedom in Turkey remained deeply troubling, and the perpetuation of restrictive and intrusive government policies and religious practice and marked increase in incidents of vandalism and societal violence against religious minorities. The Order of St. Andrew has identified and continues to focus on core issues of concern in its defense of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Among those, the continued closure of the Halki School of Theology. Halki was founded in 1844 and served the Orthodox Christian community until 1971, when it was closed due to the law banning private institutions of higher education. Denial of legal personality. The Turkish government denies legal standing to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Armenian Patriarchate, the Jewish Rabbi's Office, and other religious minorities. Confiscation of property. The Turkish government has seized thousands of properties belonging to the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Even more disturbing is the fact that historic churches, which have been maintained as museums, have now been converted into mosques. The Turkish government retransformed Hagia Sophia Museum, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Istanbul, to a mosque in July 2020. This is a deliberate symbol of Turkish policies against religious minorities. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew proclaimed Hagia Sophia can function as a place and symbol of encounter, dialogue, and peaceful coexistence of peoples and cultures, mutual understanding and solidarity between Christianity and Islam. The Order therefore respectively submits that in order to comply with the tenets of the OSCE, the Turkish government must undertake the following: grant legal standing to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, allow the reopening of the Halki Theological School, return all properties that it has confiscated from the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and end the practice of converting ancient Christian churches into mosques. The Order of St. Andrew has reported on these events every year. There has been unfortunately no change in the status of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Our commitment to religious freedom necessitates that we also speak out against Orthodox Christians who, with state support, undermine the religious rights of others. This is precisely what is happening in Ukraine and Africa, where the leaders of the Moscow Patriarchate are actively undermining the religious self-determination of millions of Christians who do not wish to be subjugated to a church that has been subordinated to the Russian government. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Citizen Research and Development Public Union.
Thank you very much. My name is Günel. I am from Azerbaijan, and I will focus on freedom of religion. Azerbaijan is a secular, multicultural, and multi-confessional society, and this is the source of our pride. The issue of freedom of conscience was the basis of the statehood activity of the first Azerbaijan Democratic Republic. The Democratic Republic of Azerbaijan was founded on a basis of principles like observation of religious affiliation of the citizen, their freedom in changing their religion affiliation, their freedom in participation in one of the religious organizations, avoiding from forcing the pupil to follow any religion and preventing from harming the self-esteem of the religious people. At present, the policy of Azerbaijan in the sphere of religion, taking into account the existence of religion in society in various forms, is founded on freedom of thought and speech, freedom of conscience. The national minorities in Azerbaijan make up about 10% of country's population, and Constitution of Azerbaijan Republic guarantees the equality of rights and freedoms of everyone, regardless of their state, race, nationality, religion, language, and sex. and religious organizations are registered in the manner by law with a state registry without any obstacles regardless of their affiliation, and they are provided with financial assistance by Azerbaijan. There are 26 Christian organizations, 8 Jewish, 1 Krishna, 1 Baha'i religious organizations in Azerbaijan. Speaker Isabella Sargsyan, you have wrong information and you are forming false opinion, but I understand your biased approach. Armenia changed Azerbaijan toponyms, demolished mosques and shrines along with hundreds of historical and cultural monuments, and insulted religious values by keeping animals in holy mosque. In the history of Azerbaijan's independence, no fact of religious or cultural monument destruction or alteration has been recorded. The position of Azerbaijan during the Karabakh War and even in the current period proves this fact. In a frame of great return to our homeland, currently 8 mosques are undergoing overhaul renovation and this construction process. At the same time, along with mosque, this construction of 2 churches has been begun in Shusha. This indicates that Azerbaijan doesn't discriminate against monuments, but rather respect different cultures, religions, because of all which are the part of our national and moral values. Thank you very much.
I thank you. Next on my list is SOVA, Center for Information and Analysis.
Спасибо.
Dear friends, I wanted to pay your attention to some of the problems in the area of freedom of conscience that have been going on for 2 years. In Russia, there is a special status of a non-desirable foreign organization, and this status can be given to an organization without trial or any specific charges, and at the same time, any cooperation with such an organization is punishable. Last year, Prosecutor General's office in the Russian Federation designated the following organizations: the New Generation Church in Latvia and Ukraine, and 2 organizations of the Church of Scientology. These decisions have been already taken in December last year. Also, these undesirable organizations have been, and these are organizations of evangelic churches. There is Article 239 of the Criminal Code, which infringes on the personality and rights of citizens. In Novosibirsk, courts started hearings against the Church of the Last Testament, whose leaders are being charged with Article 239, and they've been in custody for 2 years. In October 21, the Supreme Court ruled that when a religious organization is banned as extremist, the religious activity of believers is not itself a crime. But unfortunately, very few people have been acquitted. So repressions still continue. For example, of Muslims, the followers of Sayyid Nursi, members of Tablighi Jamaat, and others. But the greatest repressions have, as always, been against Jehovah's Witnesses. Imprisonment is being used against them most often. Systematic pressure on religious minorities by the authority has led to an increase in the anti-sectarian rhetoric in the mass media. There are still bans on religious texts as extremists, like, for example, Muslim text. One of the texts from the 15th century from the collection of Sahih al-Bukhari has been banned. So we call on the Russian authorities to stop the use of concept of undesirable organization, stop banning books and other materials as extremist, including religious ones, repeal the discriminatory decision to ban Jehovah's Witnesses organizations, and to review other decisions that ban religious associations as extremist, rescind the anti-missionary amendments from the Yarovaya package, and reconsider the policy of Protestant organization and new religious movements. Thank you so much for your attention.
Next on my list is Charter 97 Foundation. Do we have someone from the Charter 97 Foundation? If it's not the case, I will go to the next speaker on my list, which is Turkmenistan Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights.
Thank you. There is no Turkish delegation in the room, but I hope this through online tools it will reach the addressee. Well, a non-visa regime for Turkmenistan was signed, but you followed the instructions of the Turkmenistan, and you restricted the movement of Turkish citizens. What do you want to do through this? Turan is not made this way. You discriminate Turkmen people who are in Turkey, and you limit their freedom of movement. There are not dozens, but hundreds of thousands of Turkmens. You allow a criminal group to be in charge on your territories, who sell tickets for bribes to Turkish people when other people are appalled by it. You call the police and use oppressive measures against Turkmen people. I would also like to say that on the 16th of August, a few Turkmenish activists, along with a Turkish lawyer, came to the embassy in order to hand over the letter to the president and to draw his attention to the fact that the freedom of movement is being restricted. As a result, the workers of the embassy beat the activist, also the Turkish lawyer. And what is going on after that? Silence, complete silence. They took those who suffered, but the workers of the embassy were left on the side. That's what happened in Turkey. And I would like to say, Mr. Erdogan, if you want to make friends with the Turkmenish dictators, you're free to do so. But the union is not made with dictators, but with the nation. That is, with the Turkmen people. As regards the associations in Turkmenia, for 30 years there have been no non-governmental organizations or free independent associations. All this time, the European Union has been pretending that he has not seen it, and he uses double standards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next on my list is Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety. Do we have someone from Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety in the room?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I will speak in Russian. Please use your headphones.
Religious freedom in Azerbaijan has been recently under pressure. Many members of religious associations have been imprisoned. Most of the repressed are actually representatives of Muslim communities, putting many people in prison. Quite often, the authorities, both publicly and informally, they are saying that these people were Iranian agents, very often violating the presumption of innocence, and of course not allowing lawyers to take on their defense. There is more and more pressure on other religious groups like Jehovah's Witnesses. Freedom of associations and assembly has been both de facto and de jure deteriorating. So free, peaceful assemblies are being chased away, and there are many digital and technological tools used to continue repressions. So, for example, people who are identified as protesting are being then digitally prosecuted on the internet using, for example, Pegasus, created by an Israeli company, NSO Group. Around 1,000 activists have already fallen victim to this software. Many of these are very well-known human rights defenders. Also, freedom of assembly and association is being under pressure. Many applications to register organizations are simply not being processed. Many court decisions are not being implemented, and many organizations and NGOs waiting for registrations are not getting registered. For example, there is the Club on Human Rights, and I'm one of the founders of this. Those organizations that have been or were registered between 2013, they cannot work anyway, and they're not getting any support from international donors after repressions that started in 2014. And it's happening to this very day. Many donors, many Western donors, and international organizations, intergovernmental organizations, even if they wanted to finance the civil society, cannot do so. This approach is mistaken. We need to think of some other alternative ways to support our civil society. For example, in Belarus, there are some alternative ideas how to support their civil society, including civil society organization in exile. Similar approach should be used in the case of Russia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and other states that use repressions in the OSCE region, because this will allow to bring back trust towards civil society organizations.
This is Freedom House.
Distinguished guests, my name is Amy Chen and I represent Freedom House. First, Freedom House strongly condemns the Russian Federation's ongoing invasion of democratic Ukraine. We urge OSCE participating states to hold Russia accountable for the invasion and for ongoing war crimes in newly occupied areas of Ukraine and in occupied Crimea. Kidnapping, forced disappearances, torture, and other war crimes continue unabated in newly occupied territories of Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Crimea, Russian authorities have increased repression against activists and lawyers, especially Crimean Tatars. Human rights defenders are detained on false charges and denied their right to a fair trial. We urge OSCE participating states to call greater attention to detained and kidnapped people in newly occupied territories, including the estimated million-plus Ukrainians that have been forcibly relocated to Russia, and for the release of human rights defenders jailed in Crimea. We must also intensify pressure to establish an international mission to Olenivka prison to investigate the July 29th explosion. Second, Freedom House maintains that the Lukashenko regime must be held accountable for its crimes in the invasion of Ukraine and for the repression of Belarusian activists. Since August 2020, over 44,000 people have been subjected to fines and arrests. Thousands have been tortured in detention, and today there are 1,335 political prisoners in Belarus, imprisoned on false or trumped-up charges in inhumane conditions. We call for their immediate and unconditional release. Furthermore, Freedom House calls for increased support for Belarusian civil society, especially for those still operating inside of the country, as well as support to the families of political prisoners. Finally, Freedom House raises alarm over the blatant trend of transnational repression in Eurasia. This is a phenomenon in which governments reach across borders to harm, return, or control members of exiled communities. Unabated, it threatens the safety of activists, democratic institutions, and the national security of the countries to which they have relocated. Belarus is one of the worst perpetrators globally, alongside Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Turkey, and Uzbekistan. These governments are responsible for over 40% of all incidents of transnational repression recorded by Freedom House. Disturbingly, in 2021, over 70% of transnational repression were a result of cooperation by authoritarian governments. We urge governments to insulate their law enforcement, migration agencies, and courts from foreign governments seeking to silence critical voices. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is the Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. As this is the first time my delegation takes the floor, allow me to express the Holy See's appreciation to the Polish chairmanship for convening this conference. My delegation considers its distinctive duty to insist on the centrality of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief, not out of individual interest or because it would ignore other freedoms, but because this specific freedom represents a litmus test for the respect of all other human rights and fundamental freedoms. Today, the non-derogable human right to live and act in accordance with the dictates of one's conscience is challenged in different ways. A false idea that religions are a negative rather than a positive factor for our societies, and that behaviors and actions motivated by religious belief should have no room in a society is more and more widespread. Such erroneous logic results in undue limitations to conscientious objection, as well as to various expressions of belief, such as rituals and clothing. Moreover, the right of parents to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions is often called into question. However, OSCE commitments enshrine not only the inviolability of individual conscience, but also the religious dimension in its specificity as a socially organized phenomenon. Therefore, in the regime that governs access to legal personality, participating states must avoid misuse or abuse of registration mechanisms that seek to curtail the recognition of religious communities. In addition, they should always respect the autonomy of religious communities as regards their internal affairs, guaranteeing the latter to freely select, appoint, and replace their leaders, to decide on their structure and internal rules, and to define the contents of their belief. Furthermore, violations of the autonomy of religious communities may result from certain anti-discrimination laws. In this regard, it should be noted that using or interpreting commitments on intolerance and non-discrimination in a way that could unreasonably restrict freedom of religion is contradictory, inasmuch as it does not respect human rights. An example of this are the rules that prevent people from publicly expressing their peaceful opinions or imparting their faith and moral convictions. Such rules often wrongly equate the expression of faith with hatred or hate speech. Thus, religion is erroneously identified as a problem. Madam Moderator, the exercise of religious freedom by all constitutes both an element of personal fulfillment and a contribution to the good of society. Only a robust respect of this freedom can guarantee the free and full development of our democratic societies. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Netherlands. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Netherlands fully aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union delegation. And please allow me to add the following in my national capacity as the Dutch Special Envoy for the freedom of religion or belief. As stated by many others at this conference already, and as stated by the European Union delegation, the Netherlands strongly condemns Russia's aggression in the Ukraine. Not only does this do serious harm to the lives of Ukrainians, but it is also a serious attack on our international rules-based order. And this order, ladies and gentlemen, is crucial and a solid base for the fundamental freedoms protection we are here to discuss today and this week. The freedom of religion or belief is one such fundamental freedom that is indivisible and ought to be indisputable. But unfortunately, too many places across the globe today are unsafe for atheists, agnostics, and indeed for religious minorities, as we have heard. They are being persecuted, imprisoned, tortured, and sometimes put to death for their convictions. If these people are safe, everybody is safe in any society. The respect for freedom of religion or belief is a litmus test, as was already said by one of the previous delegates. It is upon us, the international community, to safeguard these fundamental rights and to be the voice of the voiceless in international fora, important fora like these. And the role of human rights defenders and civil society is crucial here, and we as the Netherlands are proud to support them. Of course, no country is perfect, and also in my country, we face discrimination of some religious minorities. But let it be our duty, as we are gathered here today, to stand for the conviction that human dignity for all should be preserved at all costs, and that it's our joint responsibility to work together when we can achieve this. The freedom of conscience, or the freedom to enjoy one's faith in whatever shape or form, is of fundamental importance to preserving human dignity. I call, therefore, upon all delegates present here today to stand strong for the freedom of religion or belief in the name of people who cannot. The Netherlands will continue to oppose restrictions to freedom of religion or belief. The Netherlands remains committed to exchange, cooperate and support within the framework of the OSCE and its personal representatives and beyond. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam. Next on my list is Cage Advocacy UK Limited.
Thank you. My name is Mohammed Rabbani. I am the head of Cage, which is an international NGO. Over the past few years, Cage has been closely monitoring and documenting a state-led program of repression that has been unfolding in France against its Muslim religious minority. This policy is unashamedly named the Systematic Obstruction Policy, and its express aim, according to Minister Darmanin, is to terrorize the Muslim community. The result has been a sustained attack on and the curtailment of civil society. According to the French government's own data, in less than 4 years, 24,000 Muslim-owned associations, charities and businesses have been targeted through unjustified investigations. 718 of them have been forced to close. 46 million euros has been confiscated from the Muslim community. In order to continue this program of systematic obstruction unimpeded, the French government has censored and in some cases criminalized critical views. In November 2020, it forcibly closed down the human rights NGO CCIF for its alleged crime of accusing the government of Islamophobia. Similarly, other civil society groups such as Baraka City and Nawa Publishing House have also been closed down. Civil liberties activists such as Yasser Louati and others have found themselves constantly harassed through artificial legal procedures. Due to this racist government agenda, France has joined the company of China and India, who are both also carrying out religious persecution of an entire Muslim minority. France has made the fatal error of adopting the playbook of far-right racists, scapegoating minorities in order to deflect from its internal regression. This is a dangerous path, and if not corrected, it is set to repeat the horrors that Europe experienced only 70 years ago. In conclusion, Cage demands the French government immediately take the following steps. Number 1, decommission state-led propaganda agencies such as the SGCI-PDR. Such agencies create the mood music for anti-Muslim hate crimes to pervade across society. Number 2, immediately put an end to the systematic obstruction policy. Number 3, recognize the legal existence of minorities and apply Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And number 4, abolish all discriminatory laws that single out Muslim communities. The 2004 ban on hijab, the 2010 ban on niqab, and the recently enacted anti-separatism law. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is United States of America.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will submit a full text for the record. Russia designates peaceful groups as extremist, terrorist, or undesirable, and arrests and allegedly tortured minority Christians, members of Falun Gong, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists, and Side Nursi readers. Its occupation authorities target religious groups, including Orthodox Christians and Crimean Tatar Muslims, and in Ukraine. Belarus removed Orthodox Archbishop of Grodno for criticizing the regime and restricts clergy from visiting prisons. Azerbaijan restricts religious observance in organizations, even of recognized faiths. Tajikistan restricts participation of women and minors in religious services, refuses minority group registrations, and limits religious literature. We welcome the release of 16 Jehovah's Witnesses, but urge the government to cease harassing unregistered Christian organizations. In some countries, laws banning religious attire, ritual animal slaughter, and circumcision threaten the viability of Muslim and Jewish communities. The Moscow Mechanism report found a decade of legislation has completely changed the scope of Russian civil society and created a new climate of fear. The Duma expanded the so-called foreign agents law definition. In advance of Russia's war, it closed Memorial International. Over 1,300 mobilization protesters across the country have been arrested, and some reportedly have received draft notices in detention. Since the fraudulent elections in Belarus, more than 765 NGOs were shut down. All independent media exiled, detained, and/or banned. All independent labor unions banned. The regime holds over 1,300 political prisoners. In Azerbaijan, peaceful protests routinely meet with mass arrests and violent crackdowns. The charges against lawyer Elchin Sadigov appear politically motivated. Turkey violently suppresses peaceful assemblies, including pride marches. Human rights defenders, media, and political leaders face politically motivated detentions and prosecutions. We urge the release of Osman Kavala and Selahattin Demirtas. A terrorist financing law has been applied against human rights non-governmental organizations. In January, protests in Kazakhstan turned violent, but the authorities arrested and killed peaceful protesters. The government confirmed 6 cases of torture to death in custody. There must be a transparent investigation and engagement with civil society. In Turkmenistan, no independent civil society exists. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan implemented new financial and programmatic reporting requirements that can be used against NGOs critical of the government. And as I said, Madam Chair, we will submit a full version of this statement for the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next on my list is Human Rights Without Frontier.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Since the 1st of January of this year, 33 Jehovah's Witnesses have been sentenced to heavy prison terms for merely practicing their religion in private and put behind bars in Russia. In September this month, 7 of them were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 2 to 6 years. More Jehovah's Witnesses who were arrested this year are also detained, waiting for their trial. They are prosecuted under Criminal Code Article 282.2, Part 1, Organization of the Activities of a Prohibited Extremist Organization. This article provides for 6 to 10 years imprisonment, plus a compulsory ban on holding certain positions and or carrying out certain activities for up to 10 years and compulsory restrictions on freedom for 1 or 2 years after their release, and also a heavy fine. The persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses has been going on unabated since their religion was banned in 2017 and all their properties were confiscated. Currently, more than 80 peaceful Jehovah's Witnesses are languishing in Russian prisons. The heaviest prison term was imposed on Berchuk Alexei, 46 years old, who was sentenced to 96 months. He will not be released before May 2029. The oldest of their prisoners is Vilen Avanesov, 69 years old. He was sentenced to 72 months in a penal colony and he will not be released until February 2024. In June last, the European Court of Human Rights said that Russia violated the right to religious freedom of over 1,400 worshippers when the Russian Supreme Court declared the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses an extremist group in 2017 on the basis of the content of their beliefs alone. In its ruling, the European Court ordered Moscow to overturn its ban on Jehovah's Witnesses. Our recommendation to the Russian Federation is to restitute their full religious freedom to Jehovah's Witnesses, to overturn the ban on their movement, and to release all the prisoners for the practice of their religion. Thank you very much.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Nicolaus Copernicus University. I see there's no one in the room from this Nicolaus Copernicus University, so I will switch to the next speaker on my list, which is Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to provide brief information on support provided by the Azerbaijani government to NGOs and other non-profit organizations as civil society actors. Today in Azerbaijan, the association of NGOs is freely and voluntary. Anyone can form a public association without notifying any public authority in advance. There are also NGOs operating without official state registration. Among them are NGO networks and coalitions created by NGOs. Official registration is a right provided to the civil society actors but should not be regarded as an obligation. Nowadays, the Agency on State Support to Non-Governmental Organizations of the Republic of Azerbaijan plays a leading role in implementation of the state policy in the NGO sector by supporting each year the hundreds of NGO projects addressing the various issues of public relevance. Madam Chair, we reject the tone and allegations made by the keynote speaker from Armenia against Azerbaijan. In the strongest possible terms, such references and unfounded allegations is full of the standard set of fabrications, distortions and deceptions, as well as the picking up an extremely biased and partial speaker is simply unacceptable. For the record, the Kazanchi Church in the liberated Azerbaijani city of Shusha is being restored, like all our other historical and cultural monuments located in the liberated territories. The Kazanchi Church is being restored based on the historical documents and archival materials. What can be the weight of this keynote speaker's allegation if it is not only liable for destroying, looting and vandalizing numerous cultural monuments and religious sites, but also for using mosques in the formerly occupied territories as pigsty, cowshed and animal pen? Azerbaijani cultural heritage was completely destroyed and eradicated through Armenia, while many historical sites were reconstructed so as to change their unique characteristics. Out of the 67 mosques, 65 were destroyed and 2 were significantly damaged. Again, coming to our today's topic, we would like to also point out that the unique model of public councils near the central and local executive authorities and municipalities involving citizens and representative civil societies are dealing with conducting public discussions. The public councils formed by the NGOs are becoming an effective mechanism to ensure public control at all levels and participate in different layers of the decision-making processes. Furthermore, the liberation of the internationally recognized territories of the Republic of Azerbaijan from Armenian occupation in 2020 have also paved the way for yet another opportunity to boost civil participation among returned IDPs. We have already received a lot of initiatives by the civil society in this regard, and we are looking forward to supporting those initiatives, particularly the establishment and support to civil society organizations in liberated territories. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next speaker on my list is International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Stephen Bronner. I'm the co-director of the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue. And our work deals with education, mediation, consultation, and the attempt to give voice to the voiceless, if you can put it that way. We feel that the equation that has consistently been made here between civil society and human rights is a mistake. We find in civil society numerous groups that are opposed to democracy, opposed to reciprocity, and opposed to the rule of law. This became evident, of course, in the January 6th insurrection, which came from below, not from above. We also feel that the attempt to give voice to the voiceless must occur within the context of a commitment to the liberal rule of law and republicanism. In order to further this, we go back to, and as an organizing mechanism, the four freedoms promulgated by our great president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1941. The problem is that these are rarely applied to the West and to the United States, and almost exclusively applied to non-Western states. So, the first freedom is freedom of speech. We see repression of language in much of Eastern Europe, of course in Russia and elsewhere, but we have a censorship wave in the United States that is shocking and disgraceful, including people such as Mark Twain, Toni Morrison, Sinclair Lewis, and among our James Joyce, and amongst our most famous writers. Secondly is freedom of religion. And here we view religion as a private interest, and we put forward two criteria for judging extremism. One is a religious organization that imposes its values on the public realm, as in the case of abortion, with regard to the Catholic Church, contraception, the day after pill, and the curtailment of the rights of women to make choices about their own bodies. We also believe that an extremist organization is one that exclusively abrogates the rights of other religions to practice and retains the rights for itself. The third of the four freedoms is freedom from want. And here, let me bring up two things. Freedom from want must include the condition of the poor with respect to imprisonment. In the United States, we have a prison industrial complex. Can I ask you to
wrap it up, please?
Yes. The highest incarceration rate in the world that falls primarily on the poor and people of color. And the last issue is one of fear, which is, in our view, the right to peace.
So I'm sorry, but you need to wrap it up now.
Yeah.
Like now?
Yeah, the right to peace and security, and for that we seek a peace with security in Russia and Ukraine, and we ask you to check out our declaration done with various Ukrainian dissidents on the OSCE website. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry if I went too long.
Yeah, we'll have a discussion about the definition of now. Next speaker on my list is Freedom Kazakhstan Foundation.
Спасибо. Меня зовут...
Thank you. My name is Paralik Mendagazeev. I'm a human rights defender and opposition activist. I would like to devote my speech to the violation of the right of Kazakh people to peaceful assembly and associations. Mass protests in Kazakhstan this year were met by the government with the shooting of the protesters. Only according to official information, more than 10,000 people were arrested. More than 200 people were killed in shooting. Hundreds are considered not found, or and these actions have not been investigated into. Over 1 year, the government has issued over 100 declines to carry out peaceful assembly. The government of Kazakhstan do not allow the organization of peaceful assembly in support of Ukraine. And the government of Kazakhstan subject human rights defenders such as Bakhajan Durugasheva, Shalipat Vikulov, and many others who deal with the gathering of information to torture of those who were protesting during the protest actions. Many of them are held in arrest, and their activity has been banned. The introduction of political reforms is not allowed. There are artificial barriers that are created. In particular, the government of Kazakhstan have twice denied the registration of the Alga Kazakhstan political party. And the democratic choice of Kazakhstan was also not allowed to carry out their activity. They have been declared extremist in Kazakhstan. There are attempts to deceive the democratic countries in order to evade the responsibility. That's why I would like to urge the government of Kazakhstan to stop the oppression of those peaceful protesters and to register the political party of Kazakhstan, Alga Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for your attention.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Office of the People Advocates Ombudsman of the Republic of Moldova.
My name is Vyacheslav Ursu, and I represent the National Human Rights Institution, and I'm going to talk about the zone of the Transnistria conflict. Recently, human rights and liberties are deteriorating in our republic. Since to the 26th of March, the authorities introduced the new doctrine of information security that actually puts pressure on HRD's right of free assembly, censorship, and so on. In the local criminal code, a number of articles have been introduced to punish alternative and critical voices. These are interpreted as crimes. Since the 24th of June of this year, persons who are complaining or filing complaints against the Transnistria regime are treated as criminals. There are cases of arrests and detention and criminal persecution. For example, Clarissa Kali, who is a young journalist, and she had a criminal case against her because she published a book that described testimony of inhuman treatment and inhuman conditions in the Transnistria army. Mikhail, who is a 70-year pensioner, and in a personal conversation, he gave some critical opinion. He was persecuted. Also, there was another person who was arrested because this man in Tiraspol said "Chwała Ukrainie" on his balcony. So right now, in Transnistria, people from human rights organizations cannot simply enter, and anyone can be accused of espionage or of, even if they are using open source information and open source analysis. I would like to say that we need to work on trust on both banks of the Transnistria region. First time in 30 years, members of my organization could go into a detention center to talk to 2 detainees. We need to support national institutions, civil society, and we need to support human rights defenders, especially in the areas of conflict, especially when these conflicts are so-called frozen. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is political opposition movement Erkin, Uzbekistan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a moderator, dear guests. My name is Hasan Burbanov, and I'm the founder of the political opposition movement Kyrgyz Uzbekistan, which means freedom to Uzbekistan. The law of Uzbekistan provides for the freedom of association, religion, and belief of its citizens, but there are procedure barriers that make it impossible to exercise these rights. There is this appearance made that Muslims in Uzbekistan gained their freedom, but in fact, in Uzbekistan, the Putin's Islam was implemented in Uzbekistan, and in particular the Chechen Islam, which provides for full humility of Muslims in front of the government. In early July this year, in Lysychansk, the president of parliament stated the following: "We are fighting for our spiritual and religious values. All Muslims of the world should know that we are at the great jihad. Vladimir Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov are defending Islam. In the face of Europe and the NATO, Russia is fighting against open Satanism. We will reach Berlin. We will win. There is no doubt about it." And this was said by the high-level official of the Russian Federation. And so religious organizations give their political tones to the war in Ukraine. If the civil society and the opposition forces of the region are going to be silent, this spread of this dialogue will lead to many Muslims fighting against Ukraine and other countries of Europe. What should we say in this situation? What should we do? Uzbekistan is facing global challenges. Iran is carrying its project to develop a great Iran, where my country is already a part of this project. Kazakh nationalists have already published a map of new Kazakhstan, where 50% of Uzbekistan is included in their territory. Dictator of the Tajikistan, day and night, is dreaming to add Samarkand and Bukharov to Tajikistan. They are trying to include us in some unions, for example, the Turan Union. We don't want to be in any unions. Dear colleagues, please tell me, what should Uzbek people do? Our religion is at risk, is at stake. Our our land is at risk. Our children and the future of our children, the future of our religion is at risk. And these threats make us carry out the fight for our homeland. And using the religious terminology, I will say we should announce jihad against our enemies, as good always beats the evil.
My list is Turkish Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ahmet Shahidov. I represent Turkish Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. So today's discussions are very important because it is impossible to imagine human life without fundamental freedoms. As a human rights defender, I want to inform you about the society that freedom of assembly and freedom of movement of entire community has been restricted, and this has been going on for many years. It's unacceptable that such a situation continues in an OSCE region and that the OSCE remains silent about it. I want to talk about the rights of tens of thousands of citizens of Turkish origin living in the island of Cyprus. Today, the most ordinary rights of 400,000 citizens living on the island of Cyprus are not recognized. Today, there are de facto two separate states on the island of Cyprus, and one of them is the Republic of Cyprus represented here. Also, the Republic of Cyprus claims the entire island. There is actually an independent country called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The origin name is Kuzey Kıbrıs Türk Cumhuriyeti. I would not like to touch on the political aspects of the issue. I want to approach the problem as a human rights defender. Imagine that for 40 years, citizens living in Northern Cyprus cannot freely visit any country they want. Citizens of this country, especially athletes and musicians, cannot be independently represented in competitions held abroad. Greece and the Republic of Cyprus, which are members of the European Union, actually trample on the most human European values, and by applying continuous sanctions against this community, they are isolating an entire community from the world. The situation has reached such a level that it is very difficult to talk about it openly and raise this problem. I want to share my personal experience. So as a human rights defender, I traveled from Warsaw to Larnaca in 2018, and when I landed in Cyprus, I was greeted as a criminal and sent back on the same plane to Warsaw. Even so, I had a Schengen visa and I was treated rudely during questioning. The reason was ridiculous, because I am a citizen of Azerbaijan, I am a Turk. The Republic of Cyprus does not comply with the Schengen agreement as well. Citizens of Azerbaijan and Turkey cannot enter the Republic of Cyprus without a special permit in addition to a Schengen visa. I want to appeal to Greece and the Republic of Cyprus here. Your behavior is against the European values and all fundamental freedoms. Finally, I see a serious anti-Turkey atmosphere here, and most of the speakers spread hatred against Turkey here. When Turkey gave Bayraktar drones to Ukraine, when Turkey made possible to export grains from Ukraine, all of Europe countries applauded Ankara, but no one talks about the rights of Turkish national minorities whose rights are trampled in Greece and other European countries. No one talks about the rights of 5 million Syrian refugees who took refuge in Turkey. No one talks about the Turkish police and soldiers killed by terrorists in Turkey today. Due to such double standards, the official representative of Turkey has boycotted
Thank you, sir. Can we wrap it up, please?
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Before going forward, I will ask if Charter 97 Foundation, 97 Foundation, sorry, is in the room. No. And is Nikolaos Copernicus University in the room? Is not. So the next speaker on my list is Armenia.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. At the outset, I would like to thank our speakers and participants for the interesting discussion. I would like to specifically focus on the right of freedom of religion or belief, which is under particular threat in our region. The obligation of states to ensure the freedom of religion or belief not only entails adoption of relevant laws and their implementation, but it also entails creation of a conducive environment to enable the exercise of the freedom of religion or belief. And that is first and foremost about being able to practice it without hindrance, which requires existence or preservation of religious and spiritual sites, places of worship, and sacred places, as well as ensuring unhindered access to those places for the parish. It is with this in mind that back in 2019, in October, the renovation of the Guhar Agha Upper Mosque in Shushi was completed by the joint effort of Artsakh authorities and private initiative. That is more than a year before the occupation of the town by the Azerbaijani armed forces. That said, let me stress that the consistent suppression of the rights of Armenians to freely manifest their freedom of religion and belief under the rule of Soviet Azerbaijan has always persisted and been pursued at the state level. Therefore, the acts of vandalism, destruction, desecration, including the acts of misappropriation and cases of misrepresentation that we are facing today in the occupied territories of Artsakh are not a new phenomenon. The most massive destruction of monuments and sacred places took place between 1997 2007 in Nakhichevan, where a number of Armenian churches and thousands of Hajj cars were demolished. I want to underline that every case that I mentioned is documented and can be easily checked even through the open sources. As a result of the launched aggression against Artsakh in the fall 2020, up to 2,000 objects of Armenian historical and cultural property came under the control of Azerbaijan, which includes more than 160 Armenian churches, more than 10 chapels, and other cultural objects. For the sake of time, I will not enumerate all those churches and cathedrals, but I will distribute my full version, the full version of my statement. The case of Azanchetsotz has been already mentioned, and I want to say that the 19th century church of St. John the Baptist has been razed to the ground, with the parish office turned into a restaurant. In the recent concluding observations on the combined 10th to 12th reports of Azerbaijan, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination recognized the attacks on Armenian religious sites and recommended Azerbaijan to investigate reports on this destruction, which Azerbaijan will axiomatically disregard. Obviously, such actions are in sheer defiance to the international obligations of quote-unquote multicultural Azerbaijan, most notably those pertaining to the freedom of religion or belief. I thank you, and I will distribute the full version of my statement.
And I thank you. Next on my list is I can't spell that. Burger Bewegung Pax Europa.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Elizabeth Sabatic-Wolf, and I represent Bürgerbewegung Pax Europa. The extended conference program notes that the rights to freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of religion or belief are fundamental elements of any vibrant, pluralistic, and participatory democracy. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic heavily interfered with the exercise of human rights and fundamental freedom in most, if not all, participating states in the OSCE region. The balance of security and freedom proved challenging for participating states, and while the restrictive measures as well as derogations of human rights instruments should have been limited in duration, in reality, oftentimes this was not the case. For instance, there were numerous lockdowns in Austria, lasting many weeks, restricting citizens' rights to assemble freely, whether for protest, for worship, or even family visits. Public reaction in the mainstream media and among government officials held during lockdowns varied dramatically, depending on the topic of the demonstrations. One demonstration of COVID-19 critics of restrictions led to what initially appeared as an attack on a building owned by an insurance company. Right away, the Austrian chancellor verbally attacked the demonstrators and the political party that organized the rally as, and I quote, instigators of a mood of violence and showing a disregard for the rule of law, end quote. While the mainstream media branded the demonstrators as, and I quote, a mob of chaos, end quote. A few days later, following the closer analysis of witness accounts and videos, the attack on the insurance building amounted to demonstrators using the opportunity for a shortcut through the building after a gate was opened in order for the demonstrators to make their way out of the police encircling them. The mainstream media never reported this. On the other hand, amid rising COVID-19 infections, demonstrating against climate change was met with sympathy in the media. In addition, in March 2021, during a lockdown, Austrian police stopped buses with demonstrators from entering Vienna's city limits, citing to, and I quote, the need to check the reason for these people being outside during the lockdown, end quote. Pax Europa therefore recommends that participating states and national authorities refrain from restricting the freedom of assembly even in times of crisis, including the refraining from the prevention of people from traveling to demonstrations outside their usual place of residence. That participating states ensure that, also in times of emergency, restrictions on the freedom of peaceful assembly are based on law, are proportionate and non-discriminatory. Thank you very much.
And I thank you. Next on my list is OVD Info.
Open Dialogue Foundation. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Martin Michalski. I represent the Open Dialogue Foundation. We're a human rights
I'm sorry, we
democracy.
have a little bit of a problem here. Just let us... Okay, so, sorry. OVD Info is not in the room? Not in the room. So, Open Dialogue Foundation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Once again, my name is Martin Michalski. I represent the Open Dialogue Foundation. We're a human rights democracy and rule of law watchdog. Since the topic of today's session is fundamental freedoms, including the situation of human rights defenders, I would like to draw your attention not to some faraway authoritarian regime, but much closer, just outside these walls, to Poland. The deterioration of the protection of fundamental freedoms guaranteed by the rule of law continues in Poland. Human rights defenders, just like other opponents of the government, can no longer count on the protection of the justice system, which instead turned into a system of oppression. Further, judges are persecuted for defending democratic standards by applying European law, most recently Judges Ewa Gregaitis and Ewa Leszczyńska-Furtak, as well as, yet again, Judge Igor Tuleya. A lack of an independent judiciary means the lack of protection for us, human rights defenders in Poland. But what is often overlooked is the Public Prosecution Service. In its February report entitled Polish Public Prosecutor's Office, Selected Cases of Malicious Persecution and Dereliction of Duties, the Open Dialogue Foundation has listed over 50 examples of the public prosecution acting as a political tool of the ruling coalition, including 7 notable cases of human rights defenders, like the leaders of the Polish women's strike or pro-refugee activists, 10 cases of targeting political opponents or critical officials, like former security services chiefs Paweł Wojtunik and Krzysztof Bondaryk, and finally 5 perceived business rivals like Piotr Osiecki or Przemysław Krych. It also lists brave prosecutors who refuse political control, like Ewa Wrzosek, who was targeted with disciplinary actions and illegally with Pegasus spyware. Poland is slowly turning into a mafia state where institutions serve to protect the ruling elite, criminals, from human rights defenders, not the other way around. We call on ODIHR and OSCE member states to not forget about us and protect us too. Thank you.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Institute for Human Rights.
Уважаемые участники конференции.
Dear participants, right now the authorities of Azerbaijan are pressing down on the freedom of assembly. There is journalists as well as protesters are being persecuted. Right now there is practically no way to have an assembly, a peaceful assembly. Also, when independent NGOs want to be registered, their applications are not being processed, regardless of the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. Independent NGOs, they don't even have the possibility to be legally funded and financed by international donors since 2014. There is a state agency for supporting NGOs, but actually this is just a way to make NGOs even more dependent on the authorities. So NGOs are being made loyal, so to speak, this way. The European Union and the Council of Europe, instead of looking for alternative solutions to support independent NGOs, both inside of our country as well as outside, these organizations are funding non-effective programs, losing or wasting millions of euro of European taxpayers. There was an action plan by the Council of Europe. Starting from 2014, the Council of Europe, together with the European Union and different member states, they spent over 3 million euro every year to support NGOs that are actually under the control of Azerbaijan authorities, regardless of our appeals asking the Council of Europe to stop funding these organizations and instead start funding independent institutions of the civil society. But our appeals have been going unheard. Please take into account our criticism and please develop mechanisms to support the independent civil society in Azerbaijan. Thank you.
This is Forum of Tajik Democratic Freethinkers.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, dear guests. I'm a journalist from Tajikistan. I'm a refugee in France. I've been living there for 8 years. There's a wave of refugees not only from Tajikistan but also from Russia for well-known reasons. And there is a threat for political opponents of Tajikistan. It has been going on for a few months. Dozens of activists were kidnapped, and they are facing torture and long-term imprisonment. Two leaders of Tajik leaders were also transferred to Tajikistan. One of them died of some suspicious illness, and as regards the second one, he was imprisoned. Mama Barshand Echmaviev and others were also subjected to persecution. We would like to urge the independent countries to be in solidarity and offer refugee asylum or political asylum to those who flee our country. And these people are facing deportation from Tajikistan if they don't sign the contract and then go to Ukraine. That's why I would like to urge the independent organizations to appeal to Russia and to stop and to our country and to stop recruiting people who will be just who will just die in Ukraine. Thank you for your attention.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Center for Citizenship Education.
Hello. My name is Daria Yakovleva. I am a Russian human rights activist and team leader of feminist group. As a part of civil society of Russia, I'm very concerned about the isolation of Russian activists, human rights defenders, and people who are against the Russian invasion in Ukraine. I am from a small region of Russia, from Kaliningrad. It's a region in the middle. It's a Russian region in the middle of Europe, and I think that the condition of civil processes and the situation with human rights in Russia are connected to the level of common safety in Europe. We hope that the European community will hear us and provide help with humanitarian visas, emergency help, and support for our work. Also, I want to add that the ban on the right to cross the Schengen area is a violation of freedom of movement. I want to say thank you to colleagues and people of Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, and Uzbekistan and Mongolia for supporting Russian people who are trying to get help and safety in your countries right now. We appreciate your humanity. Thank you so much.
And I thank you. Next on my list is Public Fund Terra Libera. Not in the room. Next speaker on my list is Azerbaijan Slavic Youth Organization.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Sabuhe. I am a chairman of Azerbaijan Slavic Youth Association. Azerbaijan is a tolerant country where all freedoms, including freedom of religions, are ensured at a high level. Representatives of all nations, all confessions and religions live as one family in Azerbaijan. There has never been any conflict on religious grounds in our country. At the same time, Azerbaijan has made an important contribution to the strengthening of inter-religious dialogue in the international world. It's no coincidence that in recent years, our country has become one of the centers of multiculturalism in the world. International events held in our country, humanitarian and intercultural dialogue forums, summits, meetings of leaders of world religions, all these are the reality of Azerbaijan. As the Azerbaijan Slavic Youth Association, we regularly carry out joint events and projects with representatives of the Slavic peoples, study their problems and achieve solutions. Now, the biggest problem in this field is the restoration of religious monuments in the territory liberated from Armenian occupation. In the territories occupied by Armenia for 30 years, not a single religious and cultural monument was left intact. Mosques were turned into pig farms. Currently, the government of Azerbaijan is carrying out the restoration with a special program. At the same time, not a single religious monument belonging to the Azerbaijan people was left in Göçe district, the ancient land of Azerbaijan where I was born. All of them were destroyed by Armenia. At the end of my speech, I call on the entire world community to be active in this matter and say no to Armenian vandalism. Göçe is Azerbaijan, Karabakh is Azerbaijan. Thank you for your attention.
And I thank you. We go back to Public Fund Terra Libera. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. The main activity of my foundation is to ensure human rights and to defend the interests of existing and former members of the Jehovah's community who turn to me for help. The modern development of religious relations throughout the world has increased the vulnerability of citizens from the antisocial activities of different individual religious organizations using the support of the secular. Well, I was giving a situation of two young people in Almaty. Recently, my organization went to the Jehovah's Witnesses in Taras. There was a parishioner who was a boy who was victim of sexual abuse by an adult minister. And actually it turned out that 4 more children suffered. But currently they cannot leave the organization. So, dear participants, I have to state that there is a practice of child abuse among Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a grave sin. And the worst thing is that in order to preserve the image of this community, the elders forbid the victims and their parents to talk about these incidents. So actually there are many cases ideologically motivated to hide these despicable practices. But we are not share the positive emotions of those who are happy that some organizations are deemed extremist or undesirable in Russia. No, we believe that everyone has the right to their belief, but we're talking about some extremes, some extreme religious practices that lead to grave consequences. And also, the right of free speech is also being violated. For those reasons, there is lack of tolerance of some of the members of the society against religious organizations. But this might be a way to discriminate many organizations. At the end of my speech, I draw the attention of the OSCE administration to exclude the use of unbiblical and anti-human internal punitive body, the legal committee. And I recommend the government of Kazakhstan to develop effective measures to provide social and legal support of those citizens who are affected by inhuman activities of Jehovah's Witnesses. Thank you.
Next and last on my list is Legal Analysis and Research Public Union.
Thank you. Ramil Iskandarli, the chairman of the Legal Analysis and Research Public Union, based in Baku, Azerbaijan. Every person has the right to freedom of movement and freely choose a place of residence. After the 44 days war in Karabakh in 2020, our region faced with the problem of freedom of movement of the refugees, internally displaced persons, and returnees from the both sides. With the help of Russian forces temporarily deployed in Karabakh area of Azerbaijan, Armenian refugees are successfully resettled. However, from the other side, Azerbaijani internally displaced people faced unprecedented problems with anti-personnel mines planted by Armenian forces in the territory of the Republic of Azerbaijan. And this created a problem of the exercising the rights of freedom of movement of the returnees and internally displaced persons. Even after the war, anti-personnel pressure mines are being discovered in Lachin region of Azerbaijan. And the production, storage, transportation, and use of the anti-personnel mines is prohibited by Ottawa Treaty of 97 in accordance with international humanitarian law. Finally, I would like to thank international community, especially UNDP, European Commission, and UK government, which helps Azerbaijani government to clear the mine zones, implements together with the civil society organizations, mine awareness programs, and support rehabilitation of people who stepped on mine in Azerbaijan. Thank you.
And I thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. I propose that we give the floor back to our panelists for final and closing remarks. We had questions about how to defend and protect human rights defenders, how to have alternative ideas to support civil society. So I will give the floor to first Mr. Holof. Mr. Holof, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It seems to me that many of the speeches that we have heard have confirmed the reality of the threat that I have mentioned at the beginning of our conference today. Now, we are not only talking about the suppressing the civil society, but also an attempt in a number of countries to put to doubt the very existence of it. At the same time, it is going on in different countries, including there is a very difficult situation with the civil society, also in those countries in which it seems that a developed democracy is present. As regards some countries, the civil society is practically eliminated. In other countries, the government has chosen the course to eliminate it. In order to eliminate the civil society, there's a whole ideological justification that is being developed. There's the idea of protection of sovereignty and the values. And it is a great challenge. What can we do here? What can we put in opposition to it? First of all, we have to admit at the background of the war of Ukraine that international institutes, international organizations are urged or developed to defend the human rights, and a serious reform needs to be adopted. It's a long-term process. At the beginning of my speech, I offered 3 steps which the OSCE could adopt immediately without further ado. We have to understand that no international institutions will be successful in the protection of the civil society without individual countries, including the participants of the OSCE, take an active policy in the defense of human rights. We cannot be limited to solely condemnation, just speaking out words or just writing our condemnation regarding the violation of human rights in different countries. I believe that the participants, the countries which are participants of the OSCE should put the security of human rights defendants should be put as a priority in their agenda. And the stopping of oppression of non-governmental organizations and human rights defenders should be in the policy of in those countries where the human rights are not just simple words or empty words. It should the auxiliary programs should be adopted, and this issue should be of a priority for those countries. It should be enshrined in international documents, including the Convention of the UN, the Council of Europe, and we have to draw attention to such documents as the guidelines of the OSCE and human rights defenders, and the ODIHR guidelines and the Venice Commission on the freedom of association. It should be carried out in reality, not just on words. And that's why we can think about human rights and the freedom of association be more defended than it is now. Thank you for your attention.
And I thank you. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Vule.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I would like first to thank the state delegates and civil society representatives who reacted to this during this discussion. And I think that some of the recommendations made during the discussion will be taken forward by the OSCE ODIHR. And I want also to say that in relation to the question asked by the Human Rights Foundation, that I think the protection of human rights defenders and civil society broadly should be seen as a common agenda, but not only the solo national interest. And I'm saying this because too often states and international community reacted too late to the civil society call when the space is starting to be narrow in the country. And we cannot, as you can see from the recent developments, we can no longer separate the state policy to restrict civil society space and democratic rights in the country with the regional and international security. We saw that recently when states ignore civil society call, it ends always by having a state that controls completely the democratic institution, suppress dissent voice, repress civil society, protest movement, and then the next step of this country is the emergence of authoritarian regime. And when authoritarian regime become common practice in the region, what we are seeing is that the regional security is undermined. It is then important for me to ensure that the international community see this as an important and threat that we should be fighting against. Another thing that I would like also to mention is also that we have also to admit, in particular, some of the democracy and advanced democracy, that criticism against some of these democracy, when they are not upholding to their international commitment, should not be seen as an attack. And it is important that democracies make sure that democratic institutions deliver, and that the democratic institutions listen to people concerned, in particular, marginalized group, vulnerable group. For me, it's the only way to prevent and to avoid that populism and authoritarian regime use the failure of democratic institutions to make fake promise and to make unrealistic promise to people and to mobilize them. I'm making this because I have been often faced on some of democratic countries asking me why we should question their performance. It is important to ensure that we are in the time where democracy is a pushback, and that authoritarian regime are using the failure of this democracy to promote their ideology. Let me also, again, in conclusion, say that the right to peaceful assembly and association are critical, and civil society role to prevent the emergence and to prevent the destroy or to prevent the emergence of authoritarian regime, but also to ensure that collective security is implemented for everyone is important, and we should listen to civil society, and this space should be also the space where we can also share some of the threats and concern that civil society raised here in order to ensure that this region become democratic region, that some of the value that you are defending can be preserved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I will give the floor to last panelist, Madame Sarkissian, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks a lot for all your interventions. And I think to me it was very good to hear that many countries reaffirm their position to stand with the human rights, to stand for FORB and all the interrelated rights. I think it's very important in these dark days. I say dark, recently I was recalling the book of Polish-British writer Joseph Conrad about the heart of darkness. I think not only myself, but many people feel that some sort of darkness is coming. And the war in Ukraine triggered lots of darkness, lots of dark side of human being. And it's not standing in Ukraine only. You can see like a chain reaction. It goes beyond. Lots of maps, which were mentioned today, would never be possible to see again. But now you see it's possible. Lots of things that you couldn't imagine that can happen are happening again. So I think it's very important for us as human rights people, but just intellectual people, to think what could be really done. Because to me, this darkness is also this growing nationalism. I do understand that in some cases it's nation building, it's lots of positive force behind it, but in the end of the day, it might cause very serious consequences for everybody and for minorities at the first place. Second thing I wanted to mention, it's the role of religion. I already mentioned the report of Special Rapporteur Ahmad Shahid. I really encourage you to read it. One of the points he makes, I think very interesting point, that there is this dichotomy and people think that religions are source of violence or source of peace. But in fact, things are more complicated, and religions are complicated, and their role is complicated. And I think we should also think how we create spaces where religions, believers, can play a positive role and can find these bridges between each other. I think it's an important effort that ODIHR, OSCE can take. Third thing I wanted to say, that in this really black and white world, it's getting more and more black and white. There are lots of nuances missed. There are lots of individual cases missed. There are lots of individual fates which become part of the big, big picture. I think it's very important, again, get back when it is possible or where it is possible to look into things case by case. And here I'm really grateful to Human Rights House Foundation, to Freedom House, to ODIHR, to other colleagues who mentioned that they do follow each and single individual case, human rights defenders, religious, belief communities, non-believers. I think it's important that in big picture, we'll still see individual and we can protect them. Last thing I wanted to say, that I second the suggestion of Mr. Orlov, maybe to have a group of experts on human rights defenders, or maybe freedom of association. Personally, I benefited a lot being a part of experts of panels of FORB. It's very open forum for discussions. Also, all these psychological and psychological, philosophic issues. And it's important to have a sincere debate. So I think that having another panel of experts, if it's possible, of course, would be beneficial. So thank you very much to everyone. I'm not going to respond to different questions raised by the neighboring country, just to say that on October 6th, there will be side event on Armenia, and everybody is welcome to come and hear more details. So thank you very, very much, Chair.
Thank you, Madam. So we're reaching the end of this session. I would like to thank our three speakers for their insights, all the participants for their question and comment, and the interpreters whose difficult work is really appreciated. Before we close, I want to remind the delegation of OSCE participating state that the right of reply statement may be submitted electronically via meeting audio Polish platform. And I would like also to inform that all participants are invited at 1 p.m. today to attend a networking event in the CSO Lounge area hosted by the Polish OSCE Chairmanship-in-Office and the Human Committee Dimension Chair Norway. And later in the afternoon, starting at 3:30, participants are also invited to attend side events organized by the events participant. And I wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.